Every employee across every organization plays a critical role in cybersecurity. I'm Jill Malandrino, correspondent with Tag Cyber, and the reason why it is so critical an employee has working knowledge with cybersecurity awareness is to prevent losing proprietary IP and, of course, data. Joining us for this segment, we have Russ Spitler. He's CEO and co-founder of Nudge. Russ, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Tag Cyber.
Thank you for having me.
You got it. Explain to us, what's Nudge's mission?
Nudge's mission is to help every organization secure itself through the power of its modern workforce. So how do we engage the employees to be a part of the mission of securing the organization?
Tell us how Nudge works with organizations to protect data and trust.
Absolutely. So as we've evolved, we've actually gotten to a point where every employee has a pretty major impact in an organization's cybersecurity posture. The choices that they make as they interact with the internet, as they start to register for new applications, as they get their work done, all have an important bearing on what the cybersecurity of that organization has, where their data ends up, what vulnerabilities they might have. And so Nudge is focused on helping organizations identify all the technology that's being used by every single employee, and then engaging with that employee in order to drive better decisions and better behaviors in terms of their interactions with the world.
I would imagine since we have moved to a more remote hybrid role as a result of the pandemic, that has clearly shifted.
So what we've seen is an acceleration of a trend that it was long-standing. So if you think about the last 10 years of your professional life, we've moved from a completely centralized technology procurement process to a completely decentralized, where every employee sort of feels the autonomy to go sign up for Airtable or Dropbox or whatever the latest tool is to get more effective work done. When we saw the pandemic hit, and one of the beauties of our technology, we can get historical trends as well, is we actually saw the rate of application adoption double in March of 2020, and that has not slowed down since.
What differentiates your solutions?
Our big focus, and this comes from the last 20 years of building cybersecurity focus, is really that focus on engaging with those employees. For years, the cybersecurity industry has treated like employees like an extension of the computer. And so what we've really done is we've worked with some great advisors, professors of psychology down at Duke, to help us better understand how we can use modern psychology and behavioral economics principles in order to actually start to drive the behavioral change within those employees. So we have a very human-centric solution, very focused on creating a positive experience with those employees, trying to drive that behavioral change as opposed to just preventing them from doing something that they're trying to do in order to get their work done.
Let's talk about cloud and SaaS, because that's
Sure.
not necessarily internally managed by one team. You have a number of vendors and other providers that have access to proprietary information. What are some of the challenges and the reality? How can you make that better and more safe for an organization?
Absolutely. So this is one of the biggest challenges we've seen. So the number of technologies that an organization uses has gone from a few dozen to a few hundred, if not a few thousand. And so when you think about that explosion of different technology stacks, of different sort of subject matter expertise you need to manage it in order to administer it, in order to make sure the right people have the right access to it, we've gone from that completely centralized world where a centralized IT guy, you call them up saying, hey, I need access to Salesforce, to now you might ask your boss or a team lead or a project lead, and they'll actually be the administrator of that platform. So when you think about that dynamic, all of a sudden we've distributed all the responsibility for keeping these things secure, for following the policy, to making sure the appropriate people have access. And so that's a huge challenge for most organizations today. We have this distributed management layer, but no centralized policy in terms of what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, making sure the right people have access, the right people have access revoked when they change teams, roles, leave the organization. And so that's really one of the areas that we focus on. How do we allow organizations to regain that centralized control while engaging with those employees in order to meet the compliance to the policies that they establish?
Let's talk more about the challenge of offboarding and role changes. Organizations are increasingly engaging contractors for a number of reasons, whether it's cost control, more efficiency. How can an organization effectively protect itself?
So the biggest challenge that we see today is kind of in three buckets. The first one is, as an employee is at an organization, there's probably a few accounts that get centrally provisioned. Again, that Salesforce, that Google Drive, whatever they might have, those core business tools. But then as they work, they get things provisioned by their team members, as we just discussed, or perhaps their local boss, or they might be registering for things on their own, just signing up with an email and password. So when it comes time for that employee to change roles or actually leave the organization, we now have this massive footprint in terms of the sort of little breadcrumbs that they left across the internet that we don't have any visibility into. And the worst thing is they could leave with a Post-it note and still have access to the Dropbox account that they created to store some documents that they're using with a partner exchange or something along those lines. And so with Nudge, what we can actually help provide is not only that comprehensive visibility of all the accounts that they've created over the course of time, we can actually automate the lockout of those accounts so we can ensure that nobody has access and leaving with a Post-it note. But we can also solve the other challenge, which is once people set up these accounts, the thing that they do is integrate it with everything else and start to try to automate the world. And so we can actually identify those API to API connections and those integrations that are being used for automation to ensure that we don't have any employee leaving the organization that ends up breaking some business process because they're the administrator or the one who had set it up.
What is the stupid user myth in cybersecurity?
There is a great saying, the problem's in the chair, not in the computer. And so when you think about the traditional mentality in the cybersecurity, we've been quick to blame the end users for, oh my gosh, I can't believe they opened that email. Oh my gosh, I can't believe they downloaded that attachment. This idea that the attackers are exploiting human nature does not make that end user stupid. It just means that we haven't done enough in order to actually have a security program that properly protects us. And so one of the things that we established in some of the research that we've done is that employees will work around restrictive security controls. If you're trying to get your job done and you hit a website saying, hey, Dropbox has blocked it from your corporate network, 70% of people in our research will work around that. That doesn't make that user stupid. That makes that user want to get their job done faster, more efficiently. And so in that research, what we found is not only are people working around those more restrictive security controls for, frankly, good reasons, they want to get their job done, but we also found that when you nudge a user in that case, when you actually engage with them in a proactive way with the appropriate messaging, we saw 78% of people willing to engage. So now we have two data points. One is a user will work around restrictive controls in order to get their job done. And the second is a user does have the right mindset in order to engage with security. They do want a more secure organization. So they're not being stupid, they're trying to get their job done. And frankly, security is probably the one that's making the misstep in those scenarios.
It's interesting. I believe it was either fourth quarter of 2022 or the beginning of 2023 where in financial services there was a big news story where everyone was using WhatsApp because particularly in Asia, it's the most easiest way to communicate.
Absolutely.
Tech services don't work the same way. Traders were looking to get their job done. I did it to communicate with contacts in APAC, and they had to disengage it from all of our phones. But I thought it was interesting the way that our compliance orgs and our tech orgs went about it. It wasn't like, oh, you're using this app, you're violating rules, you can get fired. But they were. These are the reasons why. This is why we're removing it. You're not going to get in trouble. Just keep a log of everything that you did. And I thought it was interesting the way they handled it relative to, I guess, older school compliance scenarios where it would have been hand in your phone, you're out.
Absolutely. And that actually shows a great sort of maturity in that organization, because what you're seeing there is, again, embracing those psychological principles to know that if we proactively engage, we explain the reasoning, and we actually engage in a way that shows an alternate path and usually some social proof that the alternate path is a positive one, we can actually be pretty effective at changing people's behaviors because they're not doing it just to spite their parents, right? Like This isn't a goth outfit and a teenage tattoo. Like this is something that they're doing to try to get their job done, right? And so when we think about that path, there's a lot of opportunities for us to change those behaviors and help people recognize and realize perhaps I shouldn't make a account at my doctor's office using my work email, right? Like those are simple steps that we can take that dramatically reduce the attack surface that also are things that employees, are pretty receptive to overall.
Do you think organizations are doing enough with being proactive? You know how it is when you get those emails, you have your training, your annual training, it's going to take an hour, you can't fast forward through the videos and so forth. Are organizations doing enough besides that annual training that's required?
I want to make sure I don't offend anyone out there, because I think the security awareness training is a great industry and it's done a lot to move things forward. But if you think about that in the context of any other aspect of your life, when have you ever learned a skill by watching a video for an hour once a year? It's absolutely ridiculous. And some organizations do 20 hours once a year. But you didn't learn how to drive a car just sitting in a classroom watching somebody drive on TV and then 6 months later get thrown in a car and expect to be able to perform that skill. What we need in cybersecurity is the same approach that we take everywhere else. It's on-the-job training, it's in-context education, it's just-in-time corrections, and those are the opportunities that we see employed everywhere else in our life that we're trying to bring to the cybersecurity world. So as you are using the internet, as you're making these business critical decisions, as you're making decisions that can have a security impact, just a little nudge in the right direction, give you more awareness, more context to what your peers are doing, more context in terms of what the corporate policy is. And that gives us a huge opportunity to actually make the behavioral change at the moment when we can most affect the change, which is when the person's making that decision.
Do you think if we look out the next 5 to 10 years and employees get the logical training that you're discussing, do you think we can really mitigate a lot of these issues? I cover cyber for a living, and there's times I get texts, I get emails, I'm like, all right, I know enough to use the apps. I get it if it comes from the app. I get it if it's coming from the company. But some of them look so real.
Absolutely.
Do you think if we're proactive and we get the right training in there with these nudges along the way, we can mitigate this?
I think we have a huge opportunity. This is the most underutilized resource in cybersecurity, which is we've traditionally addressed this like a technical problem. How do I make sure that that text doesn't make it to your phone? How do I make sure that when you open the link, we protect your phone from whatever ends up happening? But the piece of the puzzle that is always a part of the picture is that end employee. And to get that end employee to be a part of that, by giving them challenges that are possible for them to solve and giving them information that they can effectively use. Humans are amazing. We can do things that computers can never do. We can tell the difference between, galaxies and stars is my favorite example. But we have pattern recognitions and capabilities from millions of years of evolution that we should be relying on. And it's not as though every single employee needs to do some super incredible security tasks, but every single employee needs to be a little bit more aware of the choices and challenges that they're taking. And I think that is going to be the biggest needle mover in the history of cybersecurity if we actually are able to effectively engage that workforce, not with impossible challenges, but with little things that they can do to improve their posture and the cybersecurity of the organization.
I'm so glad you brought that up because, of course, I have to ask you about the generative AI topic where you had said nothing can replace the human brain. Do you think generative AI is going to have a big impact on what cybersecurity looks like?
So I think we have a big challenge ahead of us. Mm-hmm. So if we think about some of the issues that we had, and you just explained a few of them of, the environment that we interact with when we're interacting with our phone or computer is completely artificial. Somebody else controls all the pixels that show up on the screen, what things look like, how it goes. And so far we've been really good at creating, malicious fakes, whether it's a phishing email or a text or, UPS saying, hey, your delivery's been delayed, which I get all the time. Oh, you
get those too?
Yeah, exactly. I'm still trying to figure out what they're trying to deliver. But those things are compelling, and they do a great job of sort of making me feel like I'm missing out. They're actually using some great psychology there on us. Unfortunately, as we roll to the future, with generative AI being able to create more realistic, more human-looking interactions, whether that is now a video text message from my mom asking her to reset her bank password because she forgot it. She never does that, by the way. Or, some, compelling voice memo that we get from somebody, or some picture of something that, incites me to react. These are things that we're going to have to start to learn how to manage and deal with overall. But again, it just goes to further that human psychology of we can create emotional scenarios that are completely fake. that are completely realistic with the mediums that we have to transport them today.
All right, Russ, we appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Tag Cyber. And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, correspondent with Tag Cyber.